Together we can mobilize a global mission force to finish the task. This is your tribe.
Okay, welcome to our latest program for This is a Tribe. And today we have our very special guest, Dr. Todd Johnson from Boston, USA, and he's now the director of Center for the Study of Global Christianity of the Golden Conwell Seminary. And me and Todd, we actually have met back, I think it's 2016, I think, or 17 in Taiwan, and he came very kindly and teaching some of the facilitators and how to become better trainers, and also kind enough to teach some of the classes as well. So, but Todd is more known for many people actually for his study on the global Christianity and the state of the gospel and state of the global religions. So welcome, Todd. How are you?
Good. It's great to be with you today.
Yeah, thank you very much. You're kind enough to join us. And I know our time difference is like 12 or 13 hours apart. So this is very early for you, but it's also very late for me though. Can you just tell us a little bit about your journey, not just an educator, but also a researcher, but also involved a lot with mission mobilization as well?
Right. Well, probably should go back to some of my earliest days. I grew up in Minnesota. I was Lutheran and sort of an evangelical and a charismatic context, because this is 1970s, and the Jesus movement, which of course was mainly in Southern California, actually made it all the way to Minnesota in the frozen northern tundra of the United States. And so that had a big impact on me, but I was also a lover of mathematics. And even when I was in the 6th grade, in what we call elementary school, I was tutoring other students on how to count and that sort of a thing. But when I got into missions, I moved to Southern California, joined Youth with a Mission, did evangelism all over Mexico. And then I went to Thailand to work in the Cambodian refugee camps. And that's really where my vision was set, because I saw people who had never heard of Christ become Christians. A lot was happening at that time. This is 1980. And that really changed my life, because I'd always thought that the gospel was good news, but I'd never actually witnessed someone who had never heard it, become a believer. And of course, that set me on the track of being concerned about those who've never heard. And I landed at the U.S. Center for World Mission in Pasadena, California. That's where I was living for a while in those early years. Greatly influenced by Ralph Winter and Roberta Winter, the founders, and discovered that they had one daughter who still wasn't married, their youngest daughter, Trisha. And I was lucky enough to meet her, and we got married in 1983. And we saw the center fully paid off by 1986.
Yeah, that was amazing.
I was actually
the person
who took the call of the very last gift, because I was.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was in the phone center, and it was December of '86, I think, and someone called and said, "How much do you need?" And I said $42,000 or whatever it was, and she said, "I'll pay the final amount," and that was the moment. So it was pretty exciting to be around then. But perhaps more significantly, my father-in-law said, "You can actually use your math and be a missionary and be a mobilizer and be a researcher." And so we moved to Singapore in 1988. I worked at the Singapore Center for Evangelism and Missions, started doing research in Asia. I was very excited about that. And then in the second sort of a shift in my life, I met David Barrett, who was the author editor of the World Christian Encyclopedia, which was the most comprehensive assessment of Christianity in the world.
Yeah.
And I sensed that I really needed to do advanced graduate studies, in this case, PhD work. And I ended up in Richmond, Virginia, studying under him. And while I was studying, Oxford University Press said, "Hey, would you like to do the second edition?" Because it was a best-selling book, the World Christian Encyclopedia. And then Barrett said, "I won't do it unless you'll help me," speaking to me. So I said, before I even finished my PhD, I signed a contract with him to do the second edition. And I loved working on it. I didn't realize, though, at the time that I would be the person carrying this work into the future.
When was that? When was that?
So that was in the 1990s. And
so that's the second edition. Yeah.
Second edition, we finished in the year 2000, 2001.
All right.
And in 2003, I was invited to Gordon Conwell to, I'd actually given a lecture on the findings of the second edition, and they invited me to move the study center to Gordon Conwell, and I've been there ever since. Barrett passed away in 2011. Ralph Winter passed away in 2009. So we're sort of in a next generation. And I have a colleague here. I'm actually co-director of the center because I have a younger colleague, Dr. Gina Zerlo, who got her PhD at Boston University studying how Barrett managed to assess the whole world back in the 60s and 70s. So Barrett traveled to 212 of the 223 countries in the world in the 1960s and 70s.
That's crazy.
We don't have to do that anymore. I've probably been in 90 countries, but I don't need to go to 200 countries because we have
internet and other things.
It's a different day and age, but all that to say that that I've had help along the way and encouragement to use my gifts in mathematics to better help the church better understand what's going on around the world. That's sort of the short version for me.
I would love to listen to you all day. I mean, our previous conversation with Greg Parsons about U.S. Center and Ralph Winter, it took us like 40 minutes to get into the real topic we want to talk about, but just has so many stories. Yeah, but before we get into the trends of the latest studies, I want to ask you one very simple question, but also very challenging one, is how do you define Christianity? Because, that's for encyclopedia or the study of Christianity, you need to face that kind of definition, or even take one step further is the definition of missionaries. We have always talked about, sometimes the definition actually, will influence the whole process of survey and the numbers and stats. And so that's probably very challenging, but you probably come up with some kind of definition on your own as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. First, with Christians, we use what really is a social scientific definition, not a theological definition. And that would be, people who self-identify as Christian. Because you're most of the time you're using techniques that involve surveys and censuses and that sort of thing. And when you're first starting something like this, you don't want to start by saying that people don't have the right to say what they are. So you give people that basic dignity and right to self-identify. And what that does, of course, as you can imagine, is it makes the definition very broad. But on the other hand, I mean, part of what we're trying to do is to understand all the different kinds of Christianity. So by starting with the very broadest definition, we're able to capture the great variety of Christianity around the world, which is one of its strengths, really. But anybody who would, and of course, practically speaking, this means Catholics, Orthodox,
Yeah.
Protestant, Independent. Those are our four big categories. And then we see two movements going across those categories. One is the evangelical movement. The other is the Pentecostal charismatic movement. And there's probably more, but those are the big ones. So we do actually work within these broad categories to look at streams. And so I don't think anybody would not want to know what the broadest categories are. And of course, this immediately translates over to other religions. So like Buddhism and Islam and that sort of a thing. Now we've lived in Chiang Mai, Thailand on 2 sabbaticals. And we got to know Buddhists pretty well. And it's interesting because the same question that's kind of behind your question about what about the quality of Christianity? I mean, a real Christianity, or people that are really following. These questions are asked in other religions too.
As well, yes.
So you might say, if I said Thailand's 95% Buddhist or 90-some% Buddhist, you would say, yeah, I've been there. That makes sense to me. But if you ask Buddhists, they say, look, everybody here isn't really a good Buddhist. Too many people here are sort of animists, would be a way of saying it. They're afraid of spirits more than they are, reading the Buddha's teachings and that sort of a thing. But you wouldn't want to say 1% of Thailand is Buddhist. I don't think you'd want to say that. You might want to say 1% of Thailand are really good Buddhists, but then you got to ask who's asking that question and how did they find it out and all of that. So I'm just saying that the question of quality is one that is across all the religions. But if you're trying to summarize the situation and say, what's the global situation, it really is best to start at the broadest level, and then you can look at all the detail. You probably know we figured out there's 45,000 Christian denominations in the world. So there's a lot of detail there that you can say, well, I really like this one, but I'm not so happy about that one. I mean, and of course it changes from person to person, So anyway, that's our broad definition. Missionary is a little different. And part of what I should say is that one of the principles that Barrett abided by in his research is that you have to investigate things that you can actually find out. I mean, that maybe sounds strange, but in other words, what do the churches collect? What information do they collect that you could then interpret? And so with missionaries, the most consistent way to measure is when Christians go outside of their own country to another country. So that would technically be called foreign missionaries. They leave their country. Those are the easiest numbers to get, but even those are increasingly difficult because
it's very difficult.
People are sending without regard to mission agencies and that kind of thing. But of course, the reality is that the mission movement, especially in the global South, is actually a home missionary movement. So tens of thousands of missionaries, like in India, who never leave India, but they are clearly missionaries in that there's 400 languages, and so it isn't like everybody's the same in that huge country. So if you go from the south up into the north, it's almost like it's essentially going to a different country, culturally, let's say. But those are what we would call home missionaries in the sense, or domestic. They stay within the borders of their own country, and those are much more difficult to count because they're sort of internal. And of course, we're not saying one or the other is more legitimate. We're just talking about what a person could actually count.
Okay, thank you. I think we cover some of that during a conversation with other people who are in research, and also prayer networks, and how can we pray for the lost. For example, how in the past for a number of years, we use ethno-linguistic barriers between languages, but nowadays it's getting more challenging because of migration, because of war, because of climate change, because of many things, and people travel or not able to travel, but forced to be displaced in other places and other contexts, but also create challenges for people who are willing to do the survey. We had tried. There are some platforms and some people try to collect information like how many missionaries are sent from the global Chinese church. That is almost like a mission impossible, because you never get a real data from mainland China. That's one. And for any other Chinese speaking countries, and if you are sending people to the to the creative access countries, and they never tell you the real thing. Even the names are fake, or sometimes the numbers are fake, and there's no way we can really find out. So the challenge is definitely there. But of course, we can definitely hear from you the trends of 21st century missions and global Christianity. So there are some really interesting findings from your study. I've heard that a number of times, and also the latest study back in I think October. You spoke on a platform for Asia 2021. So can you share with us some of the key subjects that you want us to know, and probably we are not even aware?
Right. Well, maybe to start, there's one thing I think most of us are quite well aware of, and that is what is generally called the shift of Christianity from north to south. We've done some really nice mapping in our, in the new World Christian Encyclopedia, some kind of new ideas just to show the shift, but the numbers are quite remarkable. If you're talking about like 1900 to 2020, which is 120 years. So in 1900, 82% of all Christians were Europeans. All right. So I mean, that's a lot. Even if you go back 400 years earlier, which would be the Reformation, 92% of all Christians were European back then. Okay. Now, what happens in the 20th century is that Christianity shifts, demographically speaking. So that 82% falls to 33%.
Yeah.
Which means that 18% back in 1900 who were African, Asian, Latin American, Oceanian, that 18% shoots up to 67%. That's remarkable, and the reason it shifts so fast is two things are happening at the same time. One is that people in the West, or the Europeans, and even in North America, are leaving the churches and becoming non-religious, and people in the South are joining the churches and having large families. So there's a demographic shift here too. I mean, just from births, having more children. So if we just talk about evangelicals, remember that's one of the movements that we've measured. Only 8% of evangelicals were in the global South in 1900, and it's 77% today. So evangelicals have shifted even more than Christianity as a whole, including Catholics and Orthodox and all of that. So that's the biggest thing, and that has a pretty profound impact on mission. But let me mention something here, because we're talking about these numbers. Let me mention what I think is the most important thing, and that is, let's say that with the vast majority of Christians being Western in fairly recent past, there's a sense that Christianity is a Western religion, even though it started in the Middle East and was actually 1,000 years. First 1,000 years of Christianity Africans and Asians were in the majority.
Mm.
So we often think of it as a European religion, even in the early years, but that's not true.
No.
Because of the Silk Road, because of Egypt and Northern Africa, Christianity was really, in a sense, more global in the first 1,000 years than it was by the Reformation up until the 20th century. So
Yeah.
part of our problem is our memory is of a Western religion that has now spread around the world. But that's not true, you see, because our origins and our first millennium, we were a global religion. And I'd say that one of the biggest projects within Christianity right now is recovering our global identity.
Oh, okay.
I know we as far as the numbers go, we're spread all over the place. But you don't want someone in Fiji to say that they're part of a Western religion, because they're not. You want
okay.
we want Fijian identity to be how Christianity is expressed, growing up in every place in the world in an indigenous fashion. So you could see that's an important challenge now, because especially for missions, because we don't want to introduce the world's peoples to a Western religion that is spread around the world. That's not who we are. We're a religion for all peoples, and that could be a sticking point for us if we're not careful. So yes, a lot of us are aware of the fact Christianity has shifted, but are we really all of us representing a religion for all peoples? That's one thing I would want to be careful about. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's just following that. I think there's one very interesting stat that is through the last century, more than 100 years, that the percentage of global Christianity remains the same, about 33-34%. But what is the makeup of that 1/3 is different, right? Is that what you're saying? But
exactly
why?
Right.
So why is this the same? And is there a specific reason, or I don't know, just because the numbers add up, you just find out that's a reality?
Yeah, well, I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that you have these two powerful movements within Christianity happening at the exact same time. And one is secularization, which was so powerful that sociologists in the 1960s, in particular, said religion's going to disappear from the face of the planet by the year 2000.
Right? Especially after the post World War II and
so that's
destruction.
So in one sense, you'd say, why didn't the 33% shrink to 10%? I mean, that's you would have thought, if you were studying it, you'd think, there 10% of the world's population is going to be Christian by the year 2000. But what they didn't know, but what David Barrett knew, because he was living in Africa, he saw the other movement, which was the massive influx of people in the global South into the churches. And actually, just to add to the drama a little bit here, we think now, if you look at the World Christian Encyclopedia, 3rd edition now, you'll get the sense that maybe this burgeoning movement in the global South is going to outpace the decline in the North, to the point where Christianity will start creeping up 34, 35, 36%. That's what we think is happening. So what looked to be completely lost cause from a Western point of view has turned out to be pretty encouraging from a global point of view. All right. So So now that so you can obviously see that it's better for you in talking about missions mobilization. It's better to be in the church today, where there are people from almost all the countries of the world, thousands of languages who are following Christ. Because that, I've thought of this: the more diverse the church is, the more likely that new peoples will want to join, because they'll sense this is a religion that values our culture. That's a fundamental part of Christianity. Now the gospel will require certain things to go. You can't offer human sacrifice. If you value human sacrifice, you can't bring that into the church. But if you have strange instruments, they do not need to be replaced by electric guitars or whatever, or organs, or whatever you think is the right way to worship, right? So it's an encouragement to new peoples to join a religion that has great diversity in it. So we're at a definite advantage over people 100 years ago, because we really are who we are, which is a global faith. So that's really good. Then there's two trends in religion that are coming at the exact same time. One, which is surprising, is that the world is getting more religious every year.
Yeah, that's another one.
Because you'd think it was getting more secular if you just walk out the door in New York or London or wherever you happen to live, or even Shanghai, and it doesn't matter. So, but as it turns out, since the collapse of communism, really, Soviet, and since the rise of various trends in Asia, we have a world that is actually more religious every year, all the way through 2050, we think. So that means you've got to pay attention to religion if you're in missions mobilization. You can't just take a secularization view of the world, although that will be important in many places, great urban centers in the West, and so on. So that's one. The other, I think, is even more encouraging for us, and that is that the world is becoming increasingly religiously diverse. So, for example, I mentioned.
So why is that encouraging?
Oh, well, because there's nothing more encouraging to a mission-minded Christian than living amongst the world's peoples and religions. Okay.
Okay.
If it's easier to do that, it's better. You don't want all the Christians in the world to live one place and everybody else to live far
that's
away.
what you mean. Okay.
Yeah. Well, here, let me give you one personal example. When I went to Thailand in 1979, I had never met a Buddhist, never met a Thai person. I knew virtually nothing about it. I traveled all the way to the other side of the world and was so delighted to actually meet Thai people and Cambodians and Malaysians and others. So I had my first contact like that. That was probably typical from being from Minnesota. But when I go back to Minneapolis to visit my mother, who still lives in the house that I grew up in, there's a Thai woman living in the house next to us. You see, so that's and she married an American, and they moved back to Minnesota, and she runs a Thai restaurant in Minneapolis. But you see, if I had grown up now, I would have looked out my window and had contact with Thai people just right in my own neighborhood. That's what I'm saying. That's positive, because that would help me to understand Buddhism better, to understand Thai. I might have even taken some lessons from her, before going to Thailand or whatever. So increased diversity is good, but unfortunately, the West is not actually that impressed by diversity. It doesn't like diversity. There's talk of building walls, keeping people out, all of that, instead of hospitality and friendship, which are real keys, I think, to the future. And one example is, I lived in Singapore on 2 different occasions. And when I was in Singapore, when I was with you in Taiwan, I was in Singapore right before that. And I was reading the newspaper, the Straits Times, and there was an article in there that said they surveyed Singaporeans, and it said 9 out of 10 Singaporeans are comfortable living and working with people of other ethnicities and religions.
Mhm.
Now that's a big achievement, because you remember in 1960s there were riots, and it was a tough time. So the government did a few things to try to bring the religious communities together. But if you read research in, let's say, the United States where I live, it's maybe 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 10 that are comfortable. And yet people here are writing books about how to get along with people in other religions. But I think we should actually read the books by Singaporeans instead. And Asians, I think Asians in general are better at interreligious relationships, because most Asians have grown up in a context. You have to. So this is the point where it's good that we're not a Western religion, because Western people are afraid of people in other religions and don't really know what to do. So why not listen to Asians in a case like this? So anyway, those are some of the trends that we're talking about.
Yeah, talking about personal stories. So I remember when you were here, there was one occasion that you were in one of this or worship service with us, and I remember very clearly that you asked me why they are singing our songs, even it's it's in Chinese, but it's still like contemporary Christian music, and it's something like we're very familiar with. Why you don't sing your songs? And I just realized, oh, sorry, we try to make you feel more comfortable, but we should do our own thing, right? And that stick with me, because we really need to appreciate the diversity and ethnicity and for the reality that Christianity in every context actually have its own life. I have its own sense of being, right?
Yes. Yeah, and in fact, that's an important area in Christianity is worship, and there's a field of study called ethnodoxology, which is the peoples of the world and their worship. And it probably, along with ethnotheology, let's say, it's one of the most important aspects of Christianity, that you are able to express yourself within the confines of your culture. And actually that then becomes the gifts that we give to everybody all around the world. But it isn't a problem for someone to sing contemporary music, like I was in Mongolia, which is maybe even, is a fairly recent place that's come to Christianity, at least in modern times.
Yeah.
And I went to a church service. Everybody in the service was in their 20s, and they were singing Hillsong and Chris Tomlin, and so I thought, well, it's not wrong for them to sing that, but there should be, and they don't need to young people, 20-year-olds don't need to sing in throat singing indigenous Mongolian music, but they could actually, that's right. they could actually compose their own contemporary music, and then maybe people in Australia or in Texas would sing Mongolian contemporary. I mean, I don't know. I just think that's right. I just think we need more exchange, and not a unidirectional exchange, but a multi-directional.
That would be beautiful. I think that's heaven on earth. I just want to cover mission mobilization by the end of this. I think there is a number that stuck with me. I think a number of years ago, like a decade ago, probably, there is a number said there are like 86% of the of Muslims, Buddhists, and Hindus they never have a chance to meet a Christian in their lifetime, and that dropped to like 81% or 83%. Is that something from you as well?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So that's in the area of what we call personal contact.
Yeah, personal contact. Okay.
That's right, because we were trying to figure out, where, and it relates to friendship.
Okay.
Where are their friendships? Friendship's kind of a strong word. So, but
Mm.
we couldn't really measure friendship, but we
Yeah.
could actually estimate personal contact. And actually, I mean, we see this as the greatest challenge to in Christian mission, because Christianity is an incarnational faith. We're coming to Christmas here, and we celebrate the arrival of the baby Jesus,
Yeah.
Son of God, Son of Man. So when there was something important to communicate to humans, it was done in the context of a family,
Mhm.
of face-to-face
Yeah, of
contact.
course. Very
And as much,
personal.
yeah, and
Mm.
that's right. As much as we love the fact that the Bible is distributed, that there's all sorts of stuff on the internet, that could help people, introduce people to Jesus, all of that's spectacular, wonderful. But in the end, our faith is a face-to-face religion. So if we're trying to reach the whole world, it goes back to me in that refugee camp, 40 years ago, discovering that people really do think this is good news, and it transforms their lives. Even, after the genocide in Cambodia, it has transformed many people's lives. So why are we separated from those that have never heard of Christ? Maybe that's one reason why I think it's good that people groups are moving all over the world, even and moving next door to Christians in the West, but also, more diversity in Africa and other places, because I think fundamentally mission mobilization is about closing the gap of personal contact. It's about Christians
Yeah.
becoming friends,
Yeah.
friends
Building
and
bridges.
neighbors
Yeah.
with people who've never heard the gospel before.
Mm.
So we're really concerned about this. And I did some recent research showing that this gap is not closing very fast because Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists generally have larger families.
Yeah.
And so there's what we call the fertility challenge, that these large families mean that it's harder to make progress if you're not, really engaged. And then there's a second challenge, which is the one we started out with, that most Hindus, Buddhists, and Muslims perceive Christianity as a Western religion. And that's a barrier because becoming a Christian is not joining Western culture.
Yeah.
So that's another barrier. And then, of course, the one that we're most involved in is just the deployment of missionaries. Where do missionaries go? Most missionaries go to work among Christians still.
Yeah.
And that's part of that's good, because now that Christianity is so global, it's great that Christians from Brazil are working in with the Egyptian church in Cairo. That's a terrific relationship, and that is actually happening. You see, so we're not against that. That's a good movement, but we do need Christians to go beyond Christianity into the other great faiths, and to work and to preach the gospel.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think on this very subject, I think we have more we can talk about that, but I really want to ask you, this is like a personal question, especially I want to hear from you, like, what are the some of the obstacles or challenges or people who challenge you, maybe not personally, but see, the numbers are just, you guys are just trying to be objective, but the definition can actually fool people. And And what is that supposed to do with the Great Commission? Because all you need to do is just bring Bible and bring the good news to the people who need it. It doesn't really matter where, but you just need to start doing something, and just devalue the necessity why it is important when the research and encyclopedia and the study is important. I think I want to hear from you. Of course, I know it's important, but sometimes people are saying, read the Bible, just do the thing.
Right, right. Yeah, no, that's a great point. And it's sort of the pivot in my own life, because when I met Ralph Winter back in the late 70s, I had been to 20 or 30 countries. I've been distributing Bibles. I've been preaching the gospel on the street. I'd been, in people's homes. I had worked in the refugee camp. So I was an activist, you see. And when activists, who has time for thinking and researching and writing? And it really was Ralph Winter again, who said, it's good that you're an activist, but one of the big challenges in Christian mission is understanding the whole situation. It's a question that is with us every single day now. Think of I was just reading an article this morning about vaccine inequality. Well, how do you know if there's vaccine inequality if there's no research? Vaccine inequality, right. What it means is that the wealthiest places in the world have the most access to vaccines, and many of the poorer places do not. Like Papua New Guinea, which was part of this article, which is a place that's largely Christian. It's 96% Christian now. That place of 800 different Christian languages of Christians, has a 2.5% vaccination rate, and they're in grave danger of experiencing waves of COVID as a result. Now, do we really not want to know that that's the situation in Papua New Guinea? I think we need information in order to make decisions, you see. Not every decision. I would agree. Get out there, go out and evangelize. That's really important. But we also do need to know what the situation is. Where have people never heard the gospel, so that you don't just keep going down the same street over and over and over, and that sort of a thing. And by the way, I mean, for me, I've been mentioning Ralph Winter, David Barrett, but if you remember in 1974 at the Lausanne Congress, which we're almost at the 50th anniversary of that conference in 2024, Ralph Winter stood up and he said, if every person, every Christian activist went out and preached the gospel to their neighbors, that half of the world's population would never hear the gospel. You see, there's the limitations of activism. You just go and you do what's right in front of you, and you neglect half of the world's non-Christians. You see, that's pretty serious. And that was really what, you and I are here talking today because of that talk, I would say, right? Because that's the fundamental research finding that really set in motion the unreached peoples concept, the perspectives course, they're all based on this inequality.
Yeah.
So we need research to help us to continue to understand inequality. Yeah. That maybe is a quick answer. And research is we're a fairly small organization, just a handful of people. We don't even spend that much money. It's not like we're draining global evangelization. We can barely keep going from year to year. So for me, it's worth it. And we're not the final word on what's happening. We're just trying to put, a kind of a framework around what's happening. and try to be helpful. And there's all these limitations, definitions, measurements.
Yeah.
They're all there. We know that. We know that better than anyone, but we still want to help the church to see where it is and where it's not, and how to get there, and all of that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Todd. I think final words. Why working together, collaboration is important.
Yeah. Well, I think actually that comes back to where we started, because now that Christianity is all over the world, it gives us the opportunity for to learn from each other and to show the strength of Christianity, because it's in so many different cultures. And just one story from my own life, it goes back to Cambodia, to the refugee camp. At one point in my little Youth with a Mission team, I was the only American on the team, and there was Malaysians and Filipinos and South Africans, and it was really a kind of a neat little, like a UN gathering of people. And we were presenting the gospel to the Cambodians, and one of the Cambodians essentially said to me, "Who are you people that you don't seem to have any national agenda, but you're from all over the world? What is this message that you have to bring that can capture the imagination of people all over the world, and not just one?" And I'll never forget that. I thought, if we could, every time we preach the gospel, people were aware of its global significance, that would help us. You see, that's what I was saying a little bit earlier. So collaboration is part of that. Let's work together and have the strengths of different groups represented as we share the gospel with the rest of the world. I just think it's it's the best kept secret about Christianity is just how diverse and global it is.
Thank you very much, Dr. Todd Johnson from Gordon Conwell. Thank you very much for spending time with us. I think I can talk with you all day. There are so many questions and so many things I want to want to cover, and people are interested in. But really appreciate your work, and also thank you for the center have done to the greater Christianity community, and especially for the mission community that really help us. I think every time I teach or listen to lesson 9 of perspectives, and that always comes back to the picture, the imbalance, and how many people are still there and haven't heard about the gospel. That really driven us like every single time, and we got a passion for the lost, and I think, and that number speaks for itself sometimes. And thank you very much for your participation, and appreciate that. Just want to say goodbye to everyone, and hope to see you next time, and we can have another chance to talk about these greater issues around the world. Bye.